Hello and welcome back to the Gem Hawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today no matter what it is that you're doing. For our free wire tutorial here today on YouTube, I'd like to share with you a beaded petal design. Now, just a single beaded petal by itself is really pretty, quite effective, can work perfectly as a simple pendant or even earrings, which means that you can symmetrically oppose them, or you can make them exactly the same, size it down, they make really beautiful charms. However you want to use it, it's a really lovely shape and form to work with. However, if you layer them up over and over again, you get a really beautiful design. So I'm going to show you a basic beaded petal today. I'm using some 6mm blue tiger's eye and raw copper in 1mm 18 gauge and 0.5mm 24 gauge. So if you'd like to join me down at the board, I'll show you the basic of the design we'll learn together today. So here we have the basic of the design that we're going to put together today. Our frame is made with 1mm or 18 gauge. I'm working in round raw copper because it shows up beautifully on the camera. I'm also adding in some 6mm round beads. Now the piece I'm wearing on the neckline is gold wire and garnet. These are beautiful blue tiger's eye, really gorgeous to work with, and I think they work nicely with the raw copper. So what we're going to do is start off with a quite long length of wire. So if I just pop those beads back up in the corner, hopefully I won't knock them flying. And I've got around about 18 inches of that 1mm gauge or 18 gauge round raw copper wire. The first thing I'm going to do is warm up the first part of this design, first part of the wire rather, just to get that nice and smooth and fluid and ready to work. So I've given that a couple of touches just over the full length, but to begin with we're working on one half of that design. So I want to leave a reasonably long tail of wire up at the top, so I'm coming down about 4 inches or so before I make my first sideways bend. And I'm just going to flip that over to the right as I am right dominant. You may wish to reverse this if you are stronger with your left side. So what I want to do to begin with is to create a really lovely form and shape just with the warmth of my thumb and the shape of my thumb to enable me to just get that first kind of petal design going on. So I'm going to bring that all the way around. Now if you imagine that a line drops from the stem down the centre, we're going to go past the central point before we start bringing the end round in a lovely curvy swoosh. So if I just drop this down for a second, we have an imaginary line coming down the centre of that stem. We go past that point just a little bit before we start snaking that wire back around in the opposite direction. Now I've got a great big long length of wire to work with here, so if you hear it hitting the desk then I'm very sorry about that. I'm just going to turn it on its side so that I can come underneath with those bent chain nose pliers, grip very firmly at the point of the petal, we're just at this position here, and push that very sharply back towards me. Now I'm doing that in a number of small moves so I don't knock everything off the desk, and then I'm just going to sharpen this point up a little bit. Just going to draw that out of position whilst I draw that tail around. So what I want to do is to make this ever so slightly sharper but not completely closed up, so I can pop those pliers in underneath and just push just a little bit to get quite a nice little bit of definition on that point of the petal. What I'm then going to do is add a little bit of extra heat just at this section down here so that I can create a nice open curve to draw back up to the neckline point just up here where we made that first angle. So just smoothing and warming the wire until it starts to behave. You may wish to just turn that around a little bit so that you can get a better grip on it, and then just draw that wire back and across. So you can pinch up just down at the base if you wish to, and just create a little bit of a swoosh. So it's higher on the right side and lower down on the left. The widest part goes across at a diagonal, if you will. So I'm just going to mess around with that ever so slightly until I'm really happy with the swoosh and the shape. Now if you are going to make a feature neckline like the one I am wearing right now, like this one, what you may wish to do is make pairs of leaf or petal designs in the same size. So you get two the exact same size, leading down to a large central feature piece. This one doesn't have beads, it just has some weaving. So you can absolutely make opposites that will be the same size, and then just graduate them so that they're slightly smaller as you move out towards the edges of your neck piece, or you can just make one really pretty design by itself. So we have our wire just crossing over the surface of the design at the point where we made that first bend, and what I'm going to do is draw the tail of wire all the way around and back in the same direction. So the long tail is coming over the top. I'm just going to draw that underneath the stem and all the way back in the same direction. So we've coiled around. Now that's quite loose because I've got a long tail of wire to draw around, so I'm just going to tighten that up slightly and make sure that it sits neatly at that first angle point. I then need to re-warm the wire that we're working with just to get a nice, lovely smoothness to the design. Once you've got a real sense of warmth and readiness and willingness with your wire, what we're going to do is use the non-dominant hand to pinch that first angle. You do need to make sure that that's nice and tight so that it lasts a long time and doesn't move around too much. What I'm then going to do is pinch up at that joint, and I'm going to bring a slight swoosh out to the right before turning back on myself. Now if you have a good grip, that's absolutely fine, and I'll show you what that looks like before we go too much further. So the stem of your petal is coming out to the side, or the vein down the centre rather, is coming out to the side before moving inside that overall petal shape. It's supposed to do that, it just adds design to it. What I'm doing here is just using my fingertip to coerce a curve into that wire shape. And what you need to be aware of at this stage is whether or not your chosen beads will fit. Now, a really beautiful design aesthetic to have at this point is to graduate up the sizes of your beads. I unfortunately only have 6mm in these beautiful blue tiger's eye today, so my channel that I'm going to create is going to be the same size all the way down the side there. But if you are able to bring a graduation, it's incredibly effective. If I just draw that out to the side, you can see how effective that would be, starting with a tiny 2mm and then graduating up. You just need to make sure that your beads will fit in that channel. So I'm just going to give that a little bit more heat and warmth just to ensure it's going to do what I want, before I decide that that is in fact where I am happiest. So I'm going to pinch the wire in position over the top of the main form, and I'm going to trim away around about 8 or so millimeters from the end to the pass over section. So I've given myself quite a chunk of wire there. That's around about, I suppose, a little about 1/4 of an inch or so, something like that. And it's a little bit more than we need, but it gives us flexibility to just move things around if we need to. Now I've got quite a lot of wire cut away there, which I will use to make another one of these at a very, very small size a little bit later on. What I'm now going to do is grip the cut section of wire. If I lift that up, you'll see which bit I'm gripping. And I'm just going to push that end over so that it wraps around like so. If the wire has become tense because you've worked it quite a lot, that could be a little bit sore on your fingers, in which case I'll show you how to do that with pliers. I'm just going to grip that from underneath now and take that tail over around the section of wire that we just proceeded with, and then I'm going to create a hook shape. So you can see the hook is going around that swoosh of wire, and then I'm just going to close that hook up. Now that's quite a large hook that I've created today, but it's just easier to show you what that looks like with slightly more wire. You could trim that back ever so slightly if you wanted to get just a bit of a neater effect, but that's the basic of your design. Now if you pop back up to my face for a second, you'll see that a lot of my sections that are going out towards the side are slightly different, but they're a lot plainer. They don't have as much detail. So you can make a really effective design using one central petal design, which has got lots going on. You could bead it, you could wire weave it, whatever you fancy doing. And then the ones that go out towards the side you can spend less time on, in which you'll end up with a beautiful piece, but you won't have spent the 70 trillion hours that it kind of looks like you did. So focus on that central focal petal, and then you can decide how much more you want to put into your design. So the next thing we're going to do is add a little bit of detail up on the stem at the top of the design, and this again is one of the things that you can choose to alternate as you move throughout the whole neck piece if that's what you're looking to do. So for instance, my central focal petal could be beaded, and then the next three on either side could just have a bead up at the top, maybe a little bit of gentle weaving. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. I'm going to show you how to set a bead up at the top now anyway. So let's grab one of those 6mm rounds, and this is a blue tiger's eye. And you just need to make sure that they will indeed fit on your wire if you're going to use them up at the top. If they don't fit, but you want to add them in this segment of your design, that's absolutely fine. We can just invert this coil I've added up to create the effect of a round bead up at the top. So there are always options if your beads don't have that 1mm drill hole capacity. So what we're going to do is to create a not a drill hole, we're going to create a wrapped loop up at the top. I made this one quite a large wrapped loop because this can be a standalone pendant, and that means that you can get quite a good clasp through the gap you've created. If you were going to add this onto either wire or beading thread, what you may wish to do is make very tiny loops because they sit more neatly on the beading thread or wire up at the top. So I'm going to show you how to do just a basic wrapped loop up here. I'm using my pliers to give me a little bit of space above the bead so I can get 1 or 2 wraps around that core wire. I'm going to use my round nose pliers now to create a circular form up at the top, and I think I'll make this one quite tiny. So there's the first half of my wrapped loop. Take the tail all the way around those plier ends. Tiny, tiny hole just up at the top there, which will fit onto a 1mm gauge wire, or definitely fit easily onto beading thread, depending on if you want a bar necklace design or if you're going for something a little more flexible. I'm going to support the round form we made, and draw that tail all the way around 1.5, so that you can see our wrapped loop is safe and secure up at the top. I'm then going to draw the tail of wire out to the side. Just get a little bit more warmth and heat in there. Make sure that those coils are neat and tidy up at the top. Always being careful and conscientious that you're not going to damage your bead. If I flip the design upside down, it will allow me to just add some extra warmth over here on the tail of wire, and then draw that all the way around. And I'm using the bead. Tiger's eye is reasonably stable in bead form, slightly less so if it's in a chip or a nugget, but in a nice polished round bead I can use that bead to create this swooshing shape that circles around it. And I'm just going to do that on the one side. It looks quite effective, before drawing the tail of wire down and across the back, and then up over to the front side again. Now I'm going to put a little bit of warmth into that wire so I can lift it out of the way, but I'm going to ignore it for the time being for the next stage of the tutorial. In the design I'm wearing on the neckline, you can see that I've added a bead on each of the petals as it moves around the design, but I've then also added the exact same bead onto the bar that goes around the neckline, and you get this double clustered effect. It's super effective. So that's something that you can obviously add into a larger design if you're going to use that, but as I said, these work perfectly by themselves, and as you play around with the design, varying the size of your beads and whether or not you want to add in a bead at the top or not, you can see a whole raft of different designs simply creating themselves for you. So have fun with this and play around with it. We'll just show you now how to add in some channel set beads down the one side of that petal design. So in order to set some beads running around the side of our petal, I have cut myself a length of finer gauge wire, and today I've opted to use a 0.5mm gauge or 24 gauge wire. Now The reason I choose a slightly heavier wire is it means that I can sit and move these beads around. I can spin them if I want to, and a lighter gauge wire isn't going to like that quite as much. So we've left the tail of wire just sticking up for the time being, and we can draw that into a coil a bit later. But for right now, what we want to do is to attach our first section of wire. Now I'm going to lay the finer gauge wire over the top of the design and anchor it to the outside on the side that we're going to set the beads. Now what you can do is take around about 3/4 of an inch over the top. I'm going to use my pliers to show you how to bring that around. It's just as easy to do that by hand, but if I'm using my pliers it might be just a little bit easier for you to see what's happening. So I'm creating a coil around that outer frame. It's a bit messy at the moment, but what I want to do is anchor my wire securely. So I've got 4 turns, and what I'm going to do is put one side of my pliers on the outside of that frame wire and the other side of the pliers on the inside, so that they are opposite to one another, and then very gently contract those together and you neaten up that coil. Now if you don't have quite enough turns on your coil, you can gently rotate around with that coil until you have an extra couple of turns. What I'm then going to do is just scooch that up slightly. Now I don't want to ram it all the way home, because I need to ensure that I can sight a bead in between those 2 wires. Now I feel that I need to just bring that back down just a little bit. I'm going to find the end of my finer gauge wire and drop in one of these 6mm blue tiger's eyes. Now I started off with far more wire than I needed. I started off with about 18 inches of that 24 gauge or 0.5mm, purely because it's much easier to have an excess of wire than it is to try and add it on neatly later. So the bead is sitting quite neatly between those outer and inner wires. So what I'm going to do now is rotate 3 times around that inner wire, and I'm going to push the leading edge through the gap. Pull all the wire through. Now there are 2 ways you can do this. You can always push the leading edge through. It weakens the first inch or so of wire, but because it's an inch or so of wire, that's a second time around, and then a third time around, it will get used up reasonably quickly, and I don't worry too much about the weakness that we're generating here. If you were to take the wire through and then take it back out and then repeat that a couple of times, you would weaken it to the point that I would be concerned. So I've started off with about 5 coils on the one side. You can repeat that all the way down if you like. For the sake of expediency, I'm going to go for 3 coils on each side from here on in. Do make sure you get a solid anchor point on that first one though, because where the ends are the weakest points. My wire is now going to come underneath the design, underneath that inner swoosh and the outer swoosh. I'm going to pinch that into position, and then I'm going to wrap 3 times again. Now what you can do to play around with this design is perhaps wrap 3 times on the inner swoosh, 5 times on the outer swoosh. As long as you do the same thing over and over again, it looks really effective. So keeping those coils nice and tight, I'm then going to add in my next bead, and I won't go all the way down to the bottom because it's simply repeating the same thing over and over again. So let's swoosh that bead down into position, and if you need to, you can make minor adjustments to the shape to make those beads sit neatly. So I'm just going to wrap another 3 times, and then we'll finish up at the top with that coiled section. Grab a hold of the pliers with the wire, standard and classic. Push that leading edge through, pull from the other side if you wish to, and then we'll wrap for a 3rd time, and we will call an end to this segment of the tutorial now. Pull that through, and I'll just lay that down across the back for the moment. Every time you've done those 3 or however many you choose coils, we're just going to neaten them up, make them nice and tidy. As I said, if you had graduating beads, it looks really, really beautiful. I don't have any in the blue tiger's eye, so I haven't got the capacity to do that for you today. That's what we're going to go for next, which is to add a simple coil, and you can either sit that upwards if you didn't have a bead that fitted on that heavier 1mm 18 gauge wire, or you can draw the coil down, which I think looks quite effective. So I'm going to replicate the design we have here. You will need to rewarm that wire. We've got a tail of around about just over an inch, so I'm getting that nice and fluid and warm. before grabbing my round nose pliers, and when I'm making a coil that's going to sit over the face of a design, I quite often start generating that coil upwards at 90 degrees from that design. Let's just give that another rotation with the round nose pliers. So I have my round form, and what I'm going to do now is push that round form into my non-dominant forefinger until that sits over the surface of the design. Now, people do often ask me how I get my coils neat, and it's basically a combination of practice and taking your time. So I'm going to push that bead push the coil until it sits where I want it to. You can see it's still sitting away from the front of the design, and then I'm just going to carefully push that down into that beautiful swooshy shape we made right up at the top. So once we've fitted the remainder of those beads into position, finish off with the same number of coils down at the base as you started up at the top. So I would finish off with 5 wraps, doesn't matter which side, as long as it's neat and tidy. Well, thank you very much for joining me again here on the Gemhawks YouTube channel. Enjoy your petal creativity. Don't forget to give me a follow on Instagram and on Twitter if you feel like it. Over on Facebook, I'm Gemhawks and Gems Gembox, and on Instagram, it's Gems Gembox. That's Gem with a J followed by Gem with a G, just to make it super easy for you. A link to all of my socials are down in the description of the video, so pop me a like and a comment if you've enjoyed the content, and I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. Bye for now.